Hello, I'm MG and welcome to the fourth video of MLOps video series. Thank you so much for watching all the videos so far and I hope that you have enjoyed the journey. So in this video, we are going to be a little bit do some more exciting stuff in Azure DevOps and create our first pipeline that is going to create our infrastructure before starting the main part of machine learning services and also MLOps on the top. Alright, welcome back to MLOps for machine learning. So let's see what I have done so far. We came to Azure DevOps, we created a project, we named the project, and we created a connection to authenticate from Azure DevOps to our Azure subscription. And then we came to pipelines, library, variable group, and we defined the variables we need when we're going to create our pipelines. And the first pipeline we talked about is going to be my infrastructure as a code. That pipeline is going to create my Azure machine learning service and the resources that I need to have for this MLOps lifecycle. So let's start. Now we are ready to create our first pipeline. But before creating that, I told you that for creating a pipeline, there are two ways actually you can do. So let me quickly show you actually here. Here I can use the classical editor that going to create my pipeline without YAML. How it is a kind of graphical user interface that I gonna choose my task, what I gonna do in the pipeline. It's gonna be fairly simple for the people who are less comfortable with coding. But if you want to do pure coding in a YAML file to create that pipeline, well, the solution is already here and this is what we're gonna do. So for this MLOps series, I'm gonna show you actually both ways. So for now, for the infrastructure as a code pipeline, I will use the YAML file, but then for having my pipelines for machine learning part, training the model, putting the staging, putting the production, deploying the model, monitoring the model, I'm gonna use the classical editor, the graphical user interface one. But for now, what we're gonna create? We're gonna create a pipeline using a YAML file, and as you can see, that pipeline need a code. So it's gonna ask me what is the code of your pipeline, and the good news is I have already created the code for the infrastructure as a code pipeline, and it is inside my Azure GitHub. Sorry, my GitHub that you have access to in the description of the video. But in real scenarios, let's say I am a developer and the developer has developed the code for training the model and for testing the model. I have two solutions for now that where I can start for my development process. Usually developers can be in Azure Machine Learning. I told you that there's a notebooks here that you can start coding, and then when you're happy, you will push that code and whatever you have developed to your version control that you have, Git or here Azure repos. But also sometimes, like here for example, I want to use my favorite IDE, my laptop, and I have created these files regarding this project as a developer inside my laptop. So I want to push these codes to my Azure repo and I start the process. So there are two solutions that you can do. The first thing is for you, if you want to follow the steps here and do by yourself, if you open my GitHub, you can actually clone that GitHub directly to your Azure repo. You can just come here, just copy this link, and then go back to your DevOps, and in the repo part, we can just clone that here or import that repository using import, and then I can put my GitHub link. But the other way that I'm gonna show you, let's say I'm a developer, I have developed everything on my machine, and now I'm gonna ship them all and import them all to this repo and start doing those pull request stuff that we talked about. If you're familiar with Git flow, this is actually the similar steps that we're going to do here. So again, for now, you can do git clone as I showed you here, But in a real scenario, let's say I am a developer and I have developed everything again on my machine, and now I'm gonna do the import to a pull request and push everything I have to Azure repo to start my DevOps process. Okay, so I have everything already, let's say, in my folder that this is the same thing that you saw in the GitHub, but now I have developed them on my machine. I'm a data scientist. And then I have used my favorite IDE, which is VS Code on my machine, and I want to do a pull request to push everything to this repository. So again, you can do it directly from Git, as I showed you using import, but here I want to do with my virtual VS Code, which is my IDE. So the nice thing is, instead of manually copying that URL and do the git clone or clone to your VS Code, I can have a shortcut here, which is clicking on cloning VS Code. It will ask me to open a VS Code, and what you will see, I have already opened. This is gonna be a new page in your VS Code with your repository name. So this is my repo name, and automatically it has created a repository with the same name. And as you can see, it is empty, it has nothing here. That's correct, we haven't created anything yet, and my developer is already going to actually push his or her stuff to this repository, which is in my machine and also in the Git link that I show you. Awesome. So I chose a folder to do the git clone. It asked me, and I chose this folder. Let me show you. That's here. Okay. Yes, so I've created MLOps workshop folder, and there's nothing here because it's empty. But let's say now my data scientist started to work, and there's some stuff, codes created here. And let's say instead of having an empty folder, now the development has started, and my data scientist has came up with this development. And if I copy and paste in here, you can see that the same thing in my repository appeared, because I have developed something. And now that's the time I'm happy. I'm gonna push it to my Azure repository. And the nice thing is, it turned out all to be green. It shows me that, well, these are the new stuff that your developer created and you didn't have them in your repository. So that's a kind of better way of understanding what is happening to my source control. Awesome. Before actually pushing everything to the repo, I want to quickly show you the dataset, which is just a sample. I got it from Kaggle. Let me show you the Kaggle project I got the data from. And this is actually the insurance dataset I told you about. And the train dataset was a little bit heavy. Well, not that much, but for having something, just an example for this MLOps series, I tried to use a subset of that train.csv, and I have already added to that Git, so you do not need to come to this Kaggle and get the data again. But just for your information, I wanted to show you that this is the web place that I got the data. And let's get back to the DevOps and our VS Code. And this is the data actually here in the data folder. Awesome. So now that's the time I'm gonna go and push everything to my repository. I'm fine with my development. As you can see, because I added some new stuff and they turn out to be green, here in the repo source control part, I can see the notification number. And then let's say, type something if you want to do commit. Yes, I gotta make a commit, and I'm gonna call it, let's say, my first commit. And then click on commit. It is asking me there are no stage changes to commit. Would you like to stage all your changes? And then click, yeah, I'm gonna say yes because I have done some other changes. Gonna click on yes. And then if I click on these three dots here, we can see the push that you're gonna actually push to my repository that I have, and it seems to be working. So it's telling me, would you like to go to, well, ask me later, and let's check. Also, something that worth certainly to considering that I am doing the commit and push to the master branch, which is here, which is not a best practice at all. As a developer, I'm supposed to create my own branch and then push it to my own branch and then do a pull request to let someone approve before I go to master branch. Because as soon as something goes to master branch, it will start to trigger the pipelines that are going to train the model based on the new code I have developed, test the model, put it in a staging, test the performance of the model, and then put it in a production based on approval. So that's the flow. And if you're familiar with, again, the Git flow, that's a very familiar concept for you. But for now, let's make it simple. I just wanted to have everything that I have developed in my Azure repository. Perfect. I clicked on push and I did commit before using this choice here, and then I should be fine. So let me minimize that. And this is my repo. It shows it's still empty because I haven't refreshed that yet. So let me refresh it again. Awesome. Now we can see whatever we had in my machine, which was the same thing that we had in the GitHub, now in my Azure repository. So this is the place that I told you that we have everything to create all those YAML files for the pipelines already here. And that's why we needed to have that first in my repository, because we're going to use this as a main source control and then create my pipeline. And the first pipeline is infrastructure as a code that's going to create my Azure machine learning and the rest of the services we need for the MLOps. So let's see what is that infrastructure as a code pipeline code that I have here. So if you go to environment setup folder, you will see that there's a YAML file that is infrastructure as a code create environment pipeline. I click on that. And this is a kind of something like an ARM template. If you're familiar with Azure terminology and also the way that you can create these resources, that's a kind of can be considered as an ARM template that I will be used to tell what is the service I'm going to create, which is here Azure Machine Learning, and what are the configuration settings. For example, remember I told you we need the name of the subscription. This is the place that I'm going to create my Azure ML. This is the resource group name, and this is the location. That's why we define those variables in the library, in the pipeline part. And now instead of hard coding those, I can get them as a variable. And the same thing for the subscription name, location name, so on and so forth. So I have this YAML file, and again, I showed you we can have two ways to create the pipelines. One of those ways are using a YAML file, and the other one is graphical user interface. So let's go to the pipeline, and I want to create a new one. Awesome. It is asking me that where's your source code? So it is in my repo. So I'm going to select Azure repository. And then here it is asking me the repository list that I have and select one of them. Well, I just have one, and I click on that. And then it is asking me configure your pipelines, the Python package, existing Azure pipeline, so on and so forth. And I'm going to tell that this is a kind of Azure pipeline with the YAML file that I have. Remember, we pushed everything to master branch, which was not a best practice, but for now, to make it simple, we pushed everything and now it's inside the master branch. So I will click on the path to choose the path of that file that is actually creating my environment. If you remember, it was inside environment setup folder, and that was the name of the YAML file that is going to create my environment and services that I need. So I click on continue. Awesome. The same thing that we saw, it's already appeared here. And I told you we can have all those variables we define in the library, so we do not need to change anything. And let's click on run. So it's telling me now it is queued and it's going to be running shortly. Let's click on see what is happening. Yeah, so it's now starting and it is initializing the job, checking out the code. And this is the actually fun part that you can see step by step what is happening here. So the question is, what is the compute that is running these steps to create those environments that I have defined based on that YAML file? Well, there's a concept called agent in Azure DevOps that is running your pipeline YAML file and executing those codes there. And that can be, again, a separate discussion. What is that agent? How can I define it? If I can have it on-prem, on cloud, which yes, you can have all the possibilities. But for now, to just give you an answer based on the curiosity you might ask, well, yes, there's an agent running this code, and how that agent authenticate to Azure subscription to be eligible to actually create this environment for me in my Azure. Well, that's why we define that service connection here, and is actually using that to deploy. And I see that this is the step taking much longer time because it is the place that is deploying my environment and probably creating the services like Azure Machine Learning. So let me pause the recording and I'm going to record back again as soon as this part are done. All right, everything ran successfully. And as you can see, all these steps are green, which shows me that I have no error messages. Awesome. So what happened? the pipeline was supposed to create my environment. Let's check it out. And now I can go to my Azure, and this is my Azure subscription. And remember I told you we need to have a resource group name to create that machine learning inside Azure machine learning inside that resource group. And we added that name in the variable groups. Let me actually quickly show you again to make it more understandable. So we went to the library part and we went to the variable group. We create a new one, which is here. And remember, this is the resource group name, and this is the Azure machine workspace name we chose to create our Azure machine learning. So let's go to that resource group and see what has been created here, because my pipeline that created services used these variables and values to create those. So I should have a resource group with this name created if my pipeline was successful, which seems so. So I copy that, go back to my Azure portal. I just paste the name here. I should be able to see that resource group. Let me just hit enter. Okay, actually, let me go to resource group and search from there. It's just serving the resources, not resource group maybe. And then I wanna search here. And actually I have to select all subscription for now. Sorry, I have a lot of subscription. Perfect. I just search and there's a resource group created inside MG subscription, which is mine. And remember, I chose a location for that when we were defining the variables. So it sounds to be working properly. I clicked on resource group. And here are the services that has been created for me. Awesome. It smells fresh. I have my environment that I can start my MLOps journey. The first thing, I have Azure Machine Learning. Let's click on that and open it, see what is happening here. I want to authenticate using my credentials. And it's loading now. And this is pure empty, so I'm going to launch the studio. And this is the environment that you should be already familiar with, that if you have watched the first part video. That was the reason that I wanted to have a high-level overview first and then to come here. Now you feel pretty comfortable and confident when we see what has been created. But it is empty. There's no notebooks here. There is no compute here, which makes sense because we just created that. And this is the fresh environment that you can come with your teammates to start processing. Remember that we did the git clone to get everything to our Azure repository. Now here I instead used Azure VS Code, to VS Code to do a pull request and push my codes that I had in my laptop back to my Azure repository. Well, if you are not using any IDE, let's say you're not using VS Code, that's fine. If you're using Azure Machine Learning for event development, you have the notebooks here, you can still do all those Git activities as well. As an example, remember I told you we can open terminal here? Well, I have no compute. Let's create first, because without having compute, well, I cannot have any terminal. I want to have a CPU. Let me create something very small and test it. MLOps test. Yep, that should be fine for now. Click on create. It's gonna take a couple of seconds to be green, and when it's green, it will show me that, well, your computer is ready to start processing. Awesome, now sounds that my computer is ready and it's running, and this is the terminal. You must be familiar with this command, which is git clone. And what I gonna clone here? My GitHub. So I click on here, I copy that, and then let's get back. Sorry, I have so many tabs open here on the top. And then I paste this link. Enter. Awesome. So it is actually cloning to the path. I have Muhammad G. And let's wait a bit. So it seems to be done. Don't forget to refresh. And you can see I have all the development here. So instead of using your VS Code on-prem or your any favorite IDE, I can do all of them the same thing in Azure Machine Learning. So I do not need to necessarily have a separate IDE be connected to Azure Machine Learning Studio. I can use the notebooks here, develop everything, my folders, and then from here, I can do git commit, git push, and then lastly, git the push and have everything to my Git or have everything to my Azure repo in Azure DevOps. Awesome. So I just wanted to quickly show you that what we can do, the possibilities that having your code on-prem, your VS Code, or any IDE, and also the possibility of having your developing in Azure Machine Learning and do the Git push and push your code to your GitHub or like here, Azure DevOps repository. Let's say I have developed everything in my Azure Machine Learning and then I was happy as a source control, I push them all to here and then it will trigger my DevOps and all those pipeline stuff. Awesome. So let's get back to see what else has been created for me based on the infrastructure as a code pipeline we just ran in Azure DevOps. So the first thing we saw at the machine learning. But what is application insights? An application insight is a separate service that comes with Azure Machine Learning that helps you to monitor and get the logs from your compute and then to understand how your model is performing, how the operating system that is actually executing your prediction code is operating. So it will give me insights based on the logs and metrics that I'm collecting from the system, which is a must in your MLOps and in DevOps. That's why Azure Machine Learning comes with application insight. And then Key Vault. Remember I quickly showed you in Azure DevOps and mentioned that. What is Key Vault? Then Key Vault has multiple applications, but for example, one of them that can be applied here is storing my credentials. So when I'm writing down my code, I do not want to let everyone see the code and the password is there. So that's a security issue. I can retrieve that safely from Key Vault to do not reveal them in my code. And it is a service that also comes with Azure Machine Learning. And container registry. Instead of saying, oh, the code, my model worked on my machine and I'm not sure why it's not working on a separate machine we have in production. Well, now I can store that environment as an image and then that image will be stored in container registry. So that image contains the information about what was the environment I used to train the model, the packages, conda environment, and these are all automatically tracked in Azure Machine Learning and will be stored as an image in container registry. So when I want to deploy the model in production, my service already knows what is the environment needed to create as an operating system and then deploy the model in production. It gets the information from this registry. That's why it's a must to have it with my Azure Machine Learning. Last but not least, there's a storage account that I can put any type of data, structured, unstructured, semi-structured there. And also that's in storage that my Azure Machine Learning stores some of the snapshots of my codes, just in case if I lose those notebooks, the snapshots are being stored here. Remember in Azure Machine Learning, I showed you the logs, the metrics, the experiments, everything has been tracked. And the logs and outputs I showed you, those pickle files of your models, well, they definitely need a storage to be stored to show me in Azure Machine Learning. This is the backend storage that my Azure Machine Learning is using to host all the data and all those information. So the question is, if I want to use my Azure Machine Learning Studio to train a model based on a dataset, does that mean that dataset must be inside this storage and I cannot use any other storages? The answer is not necessarily. You can use a separate storage. Let's say I already have a separate data lake that is not this one and I have all the data there. Your Azure Machine Learning can still be connected to that. And actually you can use that one as your default storage instead of creating a new one. So you have the full flexibility. But for your information, these are the reasons and main applications of why we have these services when we create it. So if for any reason, any of these services are down or we have lost them, that's fine. We have a pipeline and here we can see there's a code and an infrastructure as a code that can automate this process and provision my development environment and create that resources again. And all those variables are stored as a code. That was a very, very, very simple example of how infrastructure as a code can be done. But that was a good way to understand why we need this, how it can be deployed, and practically how we can be hands-on to see the pipeline ran and we had everything created in my Azure and we checked the services. Perfect. So let's get back to this Azure Machine Learning Studio and see how we can start to use this default storage. Let me open my Azure Machine Learning Studio. And remember, I was talking about these components very quick in the first video. So let's a little bit work on it more. So we have two things here. The first thing is data store. The second is dataset. What is the difference? If I want to have a very simple explanation about that, consider that data store as a bigger umbrella. That dataset comes under data store. So data store is a way that I can make a pointer to my storage and environment that I have the data there. For example, if I click on data store, there is a default one that is called Azure MLOps storage. This is actually the exact storage that was created when I was running my infrastructure as a code pipeline. Let me actually close the extra tab so it will make more simple. Okay. Oh, I think I closed my portal. That's fine. Or maybe no, that's here. So let me get back to the resource group we created. Remember, these are the services we created. And here we have a storage account comes with Azure Machine Learning Studio. And if you check the name, that's actually the same name that I have here. So that's the storage that I can have access to from the data store. So I do not need to add the credentials of data lake or blob store to get connected. I did it once. It is automated because this is the default one and I can access to that. But if you have more data lake, more more storage accounts, you can click on create and select probably a new place to actually get connected, and they will be appeared here. And you do not need to authenticate again because you already did one. So let's open it and see what is inside. These are the information about the same thing we created in my portal. And then for now, let's talk about dataset. So we know now what is data store. We have already a default data store. But inside my data store, I have multiple files, containers. I want to grab a data set from that data store. Let's say I have multiple data sets. So how can I distinguish that which one I'm going to use? That's, I told you, data set, which is a more granular definition. I can create a data set from a data store that I have already created. Let's actually create a new one. As you can see, for creating a data set, I have multiple options, and one of them is from a data store. So what is the data store? That's the default storage I showed you there. So if I have a folder, I have a file there, and it's a data set that I want to create as a data set to register it here, I can just choose from data store, and then let's say choose a name, and then select the name for that, configure some settings, and done. But for now, let's say my data is on my local machine. We haven't moved any data set yet to that storage. Usually if the data set is big, you never have that kind of uploading, let's say, petabyte of data from your machine. So usually you have data set on cloud, on data stores, SQL databases. We can have all of them connected. But for now, let's say for make it simple, our data set is on-prem on my machine, and I'm gonna upload it here. Okay, now here I can choose a name for my data set. I have already added somewhere before. Okay, now it's good. So I just copied that name. That's the first version of that data set. That's a tabular data set. Let's make it empty for the description now. Click on next. And this is the place that is telling me where you want to upload the data. And I want to upload to the default storage that I had and I showed you in Azure portal, right? So that's the same thing I showed you in the name. This is what we created using the pipeline in DevOps. And if I don't like it, I can create a new one to a different storage that I have most likely. But now this is the only one that I have, and I click on upload. Upload files. Let's say, yeah, this is just a simple CSV file. And let me go to the place that I have the data. And this is the data set I got from, remember the Kaggle that I showed you? And this is my GitHub that you have access to through the link, and the data is there. So I'm gonna upload it. Awesome. And I click on upload. Oh, I should click on next. And that's a path that I can define. UI is the default one. You can change it. This is the path inside that storage that's going to upload the data. Let's click on next. And it was pretty fast because my data wasn't that big. So it is parsing the data set info. Let's wait a bit. And here are the main information that I can add as a setting. So as you can see, my dataset is coming now. It is showing me also the schema. 1, 2, 3 means that I have some integer dataset. And you can change the delimiter, the file format. For now, I'm happy with whatever is shown here. And then click on next. Here I can choose what columns I want to what columns I don't, and I can even change the type, which is very simple. And these are different kind of formats the type that I can define for those columns. Again, I'm happy with whatever is shown here, and this is, I think, a data set has already been feature engineered, and there are so many columns there, and the data format, I think I'm good. So I just click on next. There's something very exciting here. So before I create, I want to check profile this dataset after creation. So what does it do? It will actually create a kind of profile from that dataset that shows me what is the distribution of the data, what is the mean, median, and mode of different columns that you have in the dataset. That's what usually data scientists do based on code, to understand what is a data set and some statistical information about that data set. So I want to actually create that automatically. So for creating that, we need a compute engine. That's why it is asking me to do that. And remember, we already created one, and we call it test MLOps test. I want to click on create, and let me pause the video. It should be pretty fast. I will start recording and show you the results. Okay, it was fairly simple, I think just 3 seconds. And here you can see now the dataset part, which I'm here, it's not empty anymore. We have created the first dataset. This is the version number and the storage that I have put the data there, some more information about it, and who created. Remember, what is the dataset that this model has been used to train? That's I can have traceability. Now I can know insurance dataset was used as a dataset to train a model. So that's why we are registering dataset. And who created that dataset? MG created the dataset. See how we can have this traceability and reproducibility with logging all these steps? I just want to give you the bigger picture of what we are doing these steps and why they're needed. You will see more that why we are doing that in hands-on part next steps. And we talked about the profile. Let's watch it. So I click on this create a dataset. If I go to consume, it will nicely give me a Python code that how you can get the data. And then let's see the generate profile. I think it has already generated for me. Let me show you the explore part. Okay, yes, because we selected that we want to create a profile. So if I click on profile, and beside preview, you saw the preview, this is the place I talk about. You can see the mean, max count, missing count, empty one, mean, standard deviation, variance, skewness. So many useful information that as a data scientist, we usually need them to start processing, and sometimes we code them. Now, everything is automated for you. Awesome. That was a great asset that I just wanted to share with you. Perfect. So we have created the data set and we have created the profile overview. Now we are ready for going to the next step, which is creating actually our first build pipeline after actually infrastructure as a code pipeline in Azure DevOps. So stay tuned. We're going to see each other in the next video. Alright, that was the 4th video of MLOps video series, and congratulations, you made it. We just create our first pipeline in Azure DevOps. Now we have the resources ready, so we can think about how to create our CI or continuous integration pipeline, which means we should have an automated process as soon as there's a new development, new code from my data scientist, that should trigger an event that automatically starts to train the model, test it, and also register the model, that we can use it in a staging environment, test it, and then push it to production. So if you want to know how to do that, and if you want to know how we can start creating the CI pipeline, then stay tuned, and we're going to do that in the 5th video of MLOps video series.